Hi, my name is Mike Hartung. I'm an abdominal radiologist from the University of Wisconsin, and I would like to present a practical guide to implementing scrollable cases into your teaching. In order to make the most of these resources and also have the biggest impact, you're going to need to become a passive case collector. And that means keeping your eyes open during the clinical day, case conferences, and following up puzzling or challenging cases to enable a steady stream of material to build in your personal teaching library. I use a twofold approach where I conveniently add cases to my built-in PACS teaching file called StudyShare, and I occasionally export anonymized versions of select cases to my personal library on my work computer as I create different resources. On my own computer, I organize these using software called Horos, which is an open source version of Osirix for Mac and incredibly powerful. What will happen over time is that patterns will emerge as you gain insights into disease processes and provide material and the basis for novel educational projects. This talk will cover several techniques for introducing scrollable cases into your teaching, which can be either driven by the learner or driven by the presenter, and we'll start with how learners can access scrollable cases in our digital posters. The application for digital posters is very straightforward, and our specialty is already primed for it. We already use this basic case presentation format for educational material and usually rely on a few static images. Now we are simply leveraging a case viewing platform, either Radiopedia or Paxspin, and link the case using a QR code, which will enable the viewer to scroll through the actual cases on their smartphone. This takes our educational exhibits one major step closer to real-life radiology and transforms static images into scrollable cases. And I encourage you to test out the cases that I have here using your smartphone's camera app and opening the link. For this presentation on gastric pathology, we used Radiopedia because I had already been slowly posting these cases to Radiopedia over time, and I chose to do this in the background simply because of the global reach and durability. And it also helps me to record my teaching points over time and more quickly organize material for future presentations. If you're not keen on sharing your material publicly, you can create unlisted cases that are only viewable to you or use Paxspin, which has a great mobile viewer. So now I'd like to show you how I prepare cases on Radiopedia to export them for different educational projects. As I mentioned, I'm a regular contributor on Radiopedia and post a lot of my teaching cases there publicly, but you could also choose to have them unlisted if you preferred. So within my public cases, I'll search for the keyword gastric. And here's a first case of linitis plastica. So let's say we wanted to use that for the presentation. I click on and open that case. And this takes us to the standard case viewer, which has some findings and teaching points with the case. So the quickest way to get to a link that serves well for a full screen viewer is to go to the share function. And here we're presented with a variety of options, which is simply sharing the case, a full screen case, or a full screen case with hidden diagnosis. So if you want to not have any of the teaching points or findings available, you would use the hidden diagnosis link, or if you wanted to have them available, you could use this full screen case. Let's just say I want to use the full screen case. I will copy the URL, paste the URL up here, and that takes me to the image viewer. So it opens with this presentation window, and I simply go down to the bottom and either advance with continue or select the images to get to a nice full screen image viewer that works well on like a PC or laptop platform and also converts to a mobile viewer when it's opened with a smartphone. So this is the link that we want to use. So I simply copy again, right click, copy that link. And then I use this website called QR Code Generator, or any QR code generator website will work, but this one has a very nice, convenient way of saving the files and naming them. And paste that link here, and then that has generated our QR code. So you could go ahead and scan that code if you wanted to see how it works. And if I save that as case 1, linitis plastica, for example, that would save the case to my downloads, and then I can simply take that as an image and import it into my presentation. So that wraps up how to incorporate interactive cases into our digital posters, and now we'll take a look at how I implemented several of these resources for educational lectures. Over the past 2 years, I've been collecting closed-loop obstruction cases, and a great opportunity came up to pull the material together into a webinar, which is viewable at the following link below so you can see how I actually implemented it in practice. Because it was both a live and on-demand talk on a complex topic that I think is very difficult to effectively teach without interactive cases, I decided to go all out and include them in every form possible. The first thing I did was I sent out a collection of 12 cases as pre-work, giving the registrants for the webinar an opportunity to review the cases beforehand. There were a lot of visitors to the page before the talk, indicating that this was a popular option. This could be accomplished with Radiopedia playlists, like I showed before with the gastric cases, or with Paxman. And in this case, I chose Paxman as it provided more of a PAX-like viewing experience, and I wanted the viewer to get into the mindset that they were reading and trying to interpret the cases. The second thing I did during the presentation is I personally scrolled through the cases during the talk, giving what would almost be considered as a high-level staffing session of key observations that lead to the diagnosis. I did this using Radiopedia's playlist feature, but I could have also done this with a scrollable PowerPoint or by tabbing back and forth with something like Paxman. Third, I linked most of the cases out using QR codes so that the participants could view the cases real time, which is the same concept that I just showed with the digital posters. This admittedly works best for on-demand viewers who can pause the video, as the pace of my review does not really allow enough time for personal scrolling. And finally, at the conclusion of the talk, I posted 4 supplemental cases and provided an answer key for the pre-work cases that included the case titles and diagnoses and links to Radiopedia teaching cases of each case as a separate way to reinforce the concepts from the lecture. So let's take a quick tour of how I brought all of this together. For the pre-work, I had 12 cases that I wanted to pull from, so I exported the DICOMs from my PACS and imported them in Paxman as anonymous teaching cases. I chose to use Paxman because of its interface. It largely feels like you're using a PACS that you would at work. For production PACS, allows for triangulation and also window leveling on different series. So it's really a slick viewer for both desktop, laptop, and mobile devices. For each of the cases, selecting the case will open up the ability to share it, and clicking on share will then allow you to access a public link that can be copied and used to create QR codes or just simply linking out this URL in an email, or potentially creating an image that has a URL linked to it. And that's what I did on my website. Here on my website, I chose to organize the cases by taking a screenshot of a key image and linking out that image to each of those URLs, and of course testing them afterwards to make sure that they all linked appropriately. Although it's a little bit out of the scope of the talk, Google Sites is a very intuitive platform for building a simple teaching website or even simply sharing resources like this with people, and allows you to create a website for free, or if you chose to have a custom URL, it's actually a very low cost per year to do that. After completing the construction of the website with the pre-work cases, which did not have the detailed answers and were just simply labeled numerically, I published the website and shared this link with the registrants ahead of time to allow them access to the cases. So that concludes how pre-work can include scrollable cases, and now I want to show you a technique for scrolling through the cases yourself as the presenter. While I built this particular talk using Radiopedia playlists, I want to first start with a more familiar and intuitive step of putting scrollable cases directly into PowerPoint presentations. The first thing you're going to need to do is prepare your series as JPEG or similar images. You might be able to direct export from your PACS to JPEG as long as you're happy with the window level settings, but otherwise you're going to need a software like Horos, which is what I use to organize my teaching library, to manipulate the images and have the window level setting in the amount of images that you prefer. After I prepare my images, here I have the option of right-click and exporting to JPEG, and when I go to that JPEG folder, I have access to the axial, coronal, and sagittal series. So starting with the axial as an example, I'm going to select about 100 or so images that I'm interested in showing, and drag and drop those images onto a blank PowerPoint slide. After you do that, you might need to give it a few seconds, and when you want to resize or manipulate the images, just make sure you're not grabbing just the top image, which is oftentimes what someone will do without realizing that not all of them are selected. So in order to make sure you're always manipulating all of the images, I hit Command A to make sure they're all selected. Then I can enlarge them, which is enlarging all of the images at once and takes a few seconds. Drag or drop or pull this to different parts or center of the images. So here I'm more or less happy with that. After you're happy with the size and positioning of the images, then there's a few simple steps to animate them so that you can scroll using the middle scroll wheel of your mouse. First thing is make sure you have all the images selected. So I'm going to hit Command A again. Then you go to Animations up here. And within this animation pane, it'll list all of the images. Having them all selected within that pane, you hit Start and then on Click. What that enables you to do is to scroll through each of the images individually. So when I hit Play Presentation here in the bottom corner, you'll see how that works out. You'll start with a blank slide, and then after your first click, the first image will appear. And now I'm using my middle scroll wheel to scroll through the images. And it has a pretty smooth, almost like PAX-like feel to it. So I can scroll down, I can scroll back up. There's a little bit of a lag, so maybe I have a few too many images. But overall, a pretty smooth scrolling experience. I want to show you just really quickly, so I'm going to delete this series and start with that blank slide again and just show you that whole process kind of start to finish so you get a sense of how fast that can be done. So here, let's say I want to make a series with just the coronal images. I'll open that coronal. I'll start from here. Let's just grab from there to there, drag and drop. Command A to select all of the images. I'm going to resize. You can even have it extend beyond the view if you'd like. I still have them all selected, so I'm going to go Animations, up here, and then Start, unclick. And now it's ready to go. So I'll show you how that coronal series looks. First click, the first image appears, and then after that I'm scrolling through those images. A couple of additional tips that I'd like to share with you, and these are from a course that I made for the medical students. So this is the case STEM. And what I found is helpful for learners, especially beginning learners, to have next to a series is a reference image of the coronal or an orthogonal plane that has maybe some annotations to help to guide them. So here I'm scrolling through the axial images, but I show them a coronal image as reference. And then I've linked out the ability to jump to the next series on the bottom using previous and next. And here I'm jumping to the coronal series. And then if I want to go back and show something on axial, then I can hit previous and jump back to axial, and it stops on that last slide. So this is nice because if you're done reviewing a case, you don't have to find and scroll to the last image. You can actually just jump to the next slide. And the way those links are made is simply using a text box or a text function. And after you make the text, then click on that, go to hyperlink, edit hyperlink, and then you can do next slide or previous slide. And then those can be copied and pasted into different cases because it simply is referencing the next slide and not a numerical slide. So those are nice. You just have to make them once and then you can reuse them. I realize that I presented a lot of different tools today, and I've organized many of them on my website at the below URL that is also linked out with a QR code for your reference. I encourage you to visit. You can see some of my older presentations that focus on and go into more depth on individual applications. You can download that scrollable PowerPoint case that we were looking at and see how that works kind of under the hood by clicking on this shared link. You can see how Radiopedia cases or Paxman cases can be embedded into websites or other teaching formats, and I also give some tips on how I organize my PACS library. I hope that you have found some inspiration for your own teaching today, and I thank you for your attention and welcome you to reach out to me directly with any questions.